Where does a circle start or end? Where does an unbroken wheel begin? With an idea? With a prayer? Perhaps with a marriage. A marriage that began a lineage that is now as big as a continent. The marriage of Cebal and Germaine Ruel. Cebal and Germaine both grew up in a French region of north-central Saskatchewan, an area that their parents, the Pouliots and Ruels, had moved to from Quebec.
It wasn't just adventure, we were looking for a better life, not knowing what they were coming to, but had they known, possibly they wouldn't have come. It was a rough life, but I guess it was worth. We were all big families then, and everybody worked together. There was no social programs. Everybody helped each other out. And the homesteads were available, but they had to start from scratch and build a home. But from what we hear, it was a tough life.
A tough life, but a good life too. Alphonsine and Amédée Ruel raised 17 children, and when Cebal was born on April 22, 1914, he took to the life like a Ruel.
My grandfather on my dad's side was a blacksmith. That was his trade down east. So he settled on a farm, but was doing blacksmithing, and as a kid he'd help Grandpa with shoeing horses and stuff. So they were born into it, and that was his life.
Germaine wasn't born until 6 years later, on January 1st, 1920, the eldest of 14 brothers and sisters.
My mom was the eldest of her family, so by the time she started raising her own kids, she had already raised or helped raise a whole bunch, because she was from a family of 14. They sang beautifully, the Pouliot family, my mom's family. They harmonized beautifully, but that was their upbringing. That's what their parents taught them. You know, Mamel they had 4 girls, and then after that they had 10 boys in a row. So the 4 oldest in the family were girls, and those gals would be helping Mamel in the kitchen, preparing meals for all those farm hands that were out there harvesting or seeding or doing whatever they were doing. And you know, they sang. The story I understand is the cookbook was open on the counter, and right beside it the songbook was.
And Coin du Ciel was one of my mom's favorites. Manicole, she used to sing that so nice. She had a book full of them.
They grew up poor. You know, Dad with a grade 3 education, Mom with about a grade 7 or 8 education.
They didn't go to the same school. Mom had a school a couple miles from their place, and that was where she went to school. Dad went to school in Debden, but the church community was all the same. So this is probably where they would have met in church community activities or church itself.
Well, they may have met at church, but Cebal began courting Germaine at the cheese factory, where he arrived earlier and earlier to make his deliveries.
And you spotted this little dark-haired girl, and they're starting courting.
He knew that, you know, she was always there, and that's all kinds of little tricks in those days too, as to how to get to talk to somebody, get to meet somebody.
Cebal's tricks must have worked, because on October 12, 1937, Germaine Pouliot became Mrs. Germaine Ruel.
You know, they got married in 37 and homesteaded. Had built a little cabin out on a homestead. And Dad was, you know, breaking land and seeding whatever they were growing up there. You know, while Mom was making babies, because the first 3 were born in 1938, 39, and then 40. So 3 years into their marriage, they got 3 kids already, and they're living on a homestead out in Park Valley, Saskatchewan.
3 babies was just the beginning. Over the next 24 years, Germaine was to give birth 16 times.
Raymond, Yolande, Yvette, Edgar, Philippe, André, Clément, Donald, Marianne, Gérald, Marc, Albert, Michel, Alain, Gisèle, Rémy.
16 children, each one loved and cherished by a woman who herself seemed to have been born to be a mother. One son, Mark, born in 1954, lived for only a few hours. And yet it's a testament to how much love Germaine had for her children that she mourned this lost son for the rest of her life.
She wouldn't mention him. She wouldn't talk about him. If she talked about him, you can feel her emotions just bubbled right up. It took her a long time to accept it. I think especially that she never held him. She never...
She was always so caring, so remember her having 5 or 6 kids on her in her rocking chair and singing, and very vivid pictures of that in my mind.
Making a go of it at farming was a tough way to feed the growing Ruel family. And furthermore, Germaine and Cebal wanted their children to have the French education that was available in the village of Debden. And so when the livery stable became available, Cebal bought it and moved his family into town.
The 5 oldest before me were born either on the farm or in Park Valley. By the farm I mean Pouliot-Ruel's farm. And I'm quite sure I was the first to be born in the little log shack, the first building we stayed, the first house we stayed in Debden. I think Clem and I were born there. We didn't live there long, we just lived there until Dad could find a house. It was wonderful. It was, there might have been 500 people, usually counting the cats and dogs as well. But we were probably related to 75% of the town. There were piles of kids. I mean, everybody had big families. It was busy. We all had jobs to do. Dad had either the livery stable or the dray, was on the farm. We worked for farmers from the age of 11. We were all getting jobs to help out some farmers. You got into mischief, but you couldn't get into very big mischief because everybody knew everybody. And so, you know, we'd walk home from school and do something to somebody on the way home, you know, open the yard or knocked on the door of somebody. Our parents knew it before we got home, so I mean, you just couldn't get away. You couldn't get away with it.
We had a lot of family gatherings, and especially during the holiday time, the Christmas season. And I remember those a little bit as we were just at the age where we started to go with Mom and Dad at Christmas, and every family, every uncle had each their turn having a party, and we'd go with them. They had these cabooses that little stove in there, and just let the horses go. They knew where they were going, coming back home. They wouldn't have to drive. It was, try that with the car nowadays, you won't get home, but in those days, they'd just let the horses go and they'd take them home.
New Year's Eve, we'd always go to Grandpa Pouliot's. That was always. And have New Year's party there. And then Grandpa would give us his blessing every New Year's Eve and say a little prayer and I bless you all and make the sign of the cross. And yeah, I remember that.
We were poor. I mean, we were really poor. We'd often, the older ones possibly even more than myself. I don't remember ever going to school without shoes or not. And I know some of the older kids remember that. In the summer they might go bare feet just to save the shoes for the winter. But we were never, we never felt left out because we were poor. We were a lot more creative about how we played.
I mean, we couldn't afford to go and buy these fancy toys. You know, if we got one toy for Christmas, we were lucky, because Christmas was a time to give clothes. But, you know, we build a gun by cutting a piece of wood to look like the handle and part of the gun, and then we take a piece of copper tubing and flatten one end of it and then nail it to the top of this hunk of wood, and we put a firecracker in it and light that, and boom, you know, that was our gun. We built our toys.
And through all of this, there was one steady influence in the lives of Germaine and Cebal, and of course in the lives of their children, the church, and their faith which never wavered.
It was central. It was central. It was the, I think in many ways it was the glue that kind of kept things together. And it was probably the glue that kept Mum together. Because, I mean, I look back at what she had to live with. Mum was very, very spiritual.
She trusted God, and she believed in her faith and that He would get over whatever she was dealt with. She was very, very strong. Dad is very quiet and stuff like that, but I remember seeing him kneeling by the bed many times and praying, you know. So he got his strength from there too.
One of the issues with Catholic families too, there's always an expectation of religious life for some of the members. You know, some nuns, you know, there should be some nuns and some priests coming out of the families.
And that expectation was met when Yvette, the third oldest child, left home at 15 to pursue her dream of becoming a nun. A life she lived until at the age of 27 she made the decision to leave the convent. But Germaine, ever the loving supporter, never let a word of disappointment pass her lips.
Mom plainly said, if she's not happy, I don't want her to stay there. It was plain as that. I mean, you know, she didn't want you happy, and
And through it all the children, all the decisions, all the hard times and the good times, it bears remembering that there was a veritable mountain of work in front of Germaine each and every day.
We were all aware quite young of how much work that she did. And how much time she spent at the washing, the drying, the ironing. I mean, it was just every day. It was a 10-hour job ahead of her.
I remember Mom doing laundry for 2 days. It was never laundry day. It was 2 days of laundry. 5 clotheslines out the back. Dad set up at least 4 or 5 clotheslines from our back porch off to a great big cedar tree we had in the backyard. Sheets and blue jeans and towels and socks and underwear. Good God, the place was, it was just amazing long clotheslines full of clothes.
you had 30, 40 loads to wash. And there was no Pampers or Kotex then either, you know. No, it was long. If you baked bread, you'd make 30 loaves of bread in one day. They had a cistern, which they fill with ice in the spring. And we used to put the pails down of stuff like that, lots. But 30 loaves of bread, that's only good for 1 week. If that much.
We didn't need much. We grew everything. Mom's gardens were huge, and our potato patch was probably an acre. Huge potato patches. And so basically what we needed from the store was staples.
An awful lot of canning. Canning meat and everything. Beef, pork, chicken. and they'd do it in different kinds. Like you all had to cut that meat in little chunks, or we'd cut some in slices, fry them, and that was our steak part, and make hamburgers and can them, and meatballs, and all kinds of things. There was salt pork, and that was our bacon.
We were brought up to, everybody pitches in, everybody, and I remember that all the girls, how much they helped Mum with the younger ones, and that was their job, and helping Mum in the house, and our job was to help on the outside and bring in the wood and the ice and take out the ashes, and there was enough boys there to share the load, and I don't know, we still had lots of time to play. Life was good.
Yeah, they laughed, when the family was together and all their brothers and sisters, when we had that living room full of people when we were kids, they were always laughing and singing.
Actually, everybody found time to play. Music and laughter were always a staple in the Ruel home.
I've said with, tongue firmly planted in cheek, my mom and dad really only raised the first 5. And then after that they had help. Because I remember changing diapers for Ramy and Giselle. So it wasn't that Mom was there doing everything, but she was the captain of the ship, and Dad, I guess, the admiral.
And with his family ever expanding, the pressure on Cebal to earn a living and provide the necessities of life for his household was intense. The livery stable, really the equivalent of a modern-day car park where farmers could leave their horses and wagons while they carried out their business, provided some income. But more and more, he had to supplement that income by working away from home.
He loved doing what he did. He loved the livery stable. He loved the dray. Dad would meet the train, I think it was twice a week it came, and would deliver everything, all the freight that came on the train.
For a lot of years, he, with caboose and stuff in the wintertime, he'd carry the mail to outposts from Debden. The priest from the reserve would go to Park Valley. Dad was the one driving him back and forth. But that's what he loved.
Dad's biggest anxiety was always an issue of making enough money to make ends meet in the family. The house was very small. And in fact, one of the clearest memories I have is when they raised the roof of the house, because it was, that house I would expect was 15 by 30, 16 by 30 feet. Well, that's not a big house. And we were, 6, 7, 8, by the time we left, we would have been at least 8 to 10 children in there at one point. With Mom and Dad, that's 12. And there was no room. There was a tiny little attic where the roof of the house met the ceiling of the main floor. So it was a tiny little attic. So we would crawl into, there were a couple of beds there. So they finally raised the whole roof up 4 feet and gave us more rooms, split. It wasn't quite in half, about 2/3, 1/3, split at the stairs, I remember. And the boys had the bigger section, and the girls had the smaller section. 3 beds, 3 to a bed. And if we had friends, we would, the friend, and they were usually family, would sleep in the bed you were in, and you ended up sleeping at the foot of the bed on straw mattresses. Dad didn't show emotions, showed stress. His level of tolerance was very low. Didn't tolerate very much in terms of I guess he worked with the attitude that kids are to be seen and not heard.
His dad just had to look at you, and you know, there's that scowl, that Ruel scowl that says, "Oh my God, what have I done now? And I better just do something else because this one isn't working for me." Dad would just look at you, or he'd say, "Hey," and everybody understood that the noise level was getting up too high, or you know, we're about to wreck something, so we better dial it back. He never had to say much, but poor Mom, we just ignored Mom.
And Dad was away a lot too. I think that created a lot of stress. He, especially after he sold the liver stable and the dray, then he had to go out of town to work.
Working away meant spending weeks in logging camps, managing the horses, or picking up whatever construction jobs were available. But this kind of work was getting harder and harder to find, and finally, in 1964, two of Cebel's brothers convinced him to move his family to Port Alberni, where good-paying jobs seemed to be everywhere.
The story I heard is that they had tried to get Dad to come out west and to find work that would leave him closer to home, so that he wouldn't be away from home so much and leave Mom at home with all those kids. And so they finally convinced him to land a job here in Port Alberni, so he started work in a construction project at the plywood plant. Mom went back to Saskatchewan and picked us all up, and with the help of the older ones like Edgar and Philip and Andre and those guys, Clem, they packed us all up from Ramey at 6 months old to myself at 8, and Jerry was 12. Marianne must have been 14 at the time, and Dawn would have been about 15. So off we went, 11 kids and my mother on a train heading west.
Well, the three older girls were away from home by then. Edgar had been away, gone to college. I'm the only one that never left home. Home left me.
It must have been a horrendous decision for Mom. You know, deciding what to take. Basically, you know, she brought her freezer, I remember, because she'd had it given to her for the 25th. It was given as a gift for their 25th, which was just 2 years before. But there was nothing else. The rest was the clothes, you know, the clothes and the memorabilia that she had, and that was it.
They had just enough tonnage for each person, you know, so every one of us, all 11 of us, had our allotted amount of weight in boxes in the luggage car, cardboard boxes and suitcases and whatever all else they could do.
We look back at that afterwards, and we don't know where she could have done it, how she could have done it.
But she did it, moving her entire family across the country to a community and a life that was far different from the one they had left behind.
A lot of things changed when we moved to BC. I think Mom and Dad found it a lot harder. It was a culture that was foreign to them. They didn't know that kind of city life. The kids, they didn't have all the chores that we had, and so the kids had to keep themselves busy.
The one memory that I do have is feeling or wondering what all this excitement was about, because the girls used to just squeal and scream about those 4 boys from Liverpool. The Beatles had just hit North America, and the bubblegum cards were a rage. And these girls I remember watching them, they'd pull out a picture of Ringo Starr or John Lennon or somebody, and they'd just squeal and scream and hold this card to their chest, and I had no idea what this was about. I just remember being absolutely baffled by it.
They experienced things in the community, at the school. They saw things, heard things. The language was very different, and so these kids were being ingrained in a culture that was so foreign for Mom and Dad. Although they made much better money, they still, the cost of living was a lot higher. I mean, the gardens weren't as big, so they had to buy a lot more. And so we were aware that there was really never enough money.
You know, the hand-me-down shoes, the homemade clothes, you know, going to a birthday party one time, and we didn't have much. And so, you know, I remember Mom giving me a dime as a birthday present. You know, when everybody else was buying gifts that were probably, you know, worth $1 or $2. The fact that we had less than others, the fact that we had to participate more in family life than others did. You know, we had to work out in the garden. If we dared say we were bored, Dad would hand us a shovel and say, well, there's potholes out in the driveway. Go fix those. His workshop, oh my, if anybody has ever seen Dad's screws, and nails, I don't know how many hours I spent straightening nails. Dad would go to old, you know, places where they were tearing down buildings, and he would grab, you know, use scrap lumber, doors, windows, whatever he could get his hands on, and, you know, he'd stack it all up there in the shed, and we'd be put to task, put to work, pounding the nails out of those boards, straightening them out, and he didn't organize them in size, shape, or otherwise. They all got tossed into a big old bucket. So if you're looking for a bunch of 1.25 inch finishing nails, it could take you most of the rest of the day to pick them out of that big bucket full of nails.
And it wasn't just straightening nails and filling potholes. Much like their older brothers and sisters back in Debden, the younger Ruels had a whole list of chores.
Mom would drag our sorry butts that wanted to sleep till noon out of bed at, you know, probably 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd work in the garden while it was still reasonably cool out. And then the last thing we'd have to do is pick a gallon bucket, one of those ice cream buckets full of raspberries. God-awful raspberries. Those I got good and tired of as well. But we'd have to pick that bucket of raspberries, and once we put that on the kitchen counter, we were free to grab our towel and our swimming trunks and go off to the river. So on those nice hot days, we'd spend the afternoon at the river, come home for dinner, and then we might have you know, once it cooled off in the evening, we might have a few more chores to do, and then we were free to play. I mean, our property in Port Alberni was the neighborhood playground. You know, we had a yard light in the front yard, and we had 3 outbuildings in the house, and three acres of cleared land, and we'd play kick the can and hide and seek and Rover, Red Rover, and just all sorts of games with the LaCharity family, the Wolf family, the Wallers, and just all the neighborhood kids who used to gather in our yard.
And then, in 1972, the unimaginable happened. At the age of 20, Jerry, the 10th oldest child, was killed in a tragic car accident. An accident that happened ironically when their parents were away on a rare visit to the family in Saskatchewan.
That night that he died, well, they had gone to visit one of Dad's sisters that's on the farm. And the first call came at home, and they were looking for Mom and Dad. And then they came home right away when they first got the first call, but when Mom got to our place, she knew. When the second call came, she knew that he passed away. That was...
We're so, with that number, we're so interlinked. We're so interconnected. That the bonds are much, much deeper. And we feel it. We feel for all of them.
Dad managed to keep it together and take care of Mom and get her back here to Port Alberni. And a huge revelation came to me when they came around the corner onto that driveway, and all of us had gathered there at the house on Kirkpatrick Road. And when Dad got out of the car is when he lost control. now he had gotten Mom home. All of us were gathering or had gathered, and so there were others there who could look after Mom, and that's when he completely fell apart.
I can still see the pain. Like I've seen frustration, I've seen impatience, I've seen anger in that, but I had never seen the pain.
In many ways, Jerry's death made the circle even stronger, reminding the remaining 14 children, many of them now parents themselves, to cherish the time they had together. And then, unexpectedly, the family expanded to include one more, a part of the wheel that had been missing for decades. Raymond, the oldest of the Ruel children, had had a baby out of wedlock when she was just a teenager in that tiny Catholic village. Her child, a son, was given up for adoption, but Raymond never, ever forgot him.
I mean, you don't go anywhere without thinking about it, and maybe you'd see him, you know. Because there's a piece missing, you know.
Raymond's son, now a grown man named Gilles, was searching as well, and it was him who in 1986 reached out to find his mother, and in doing so found a whole new family.
The phone rang, so I answered it. And the minute I answered the phone, and by a couple of answers, and Vic knew that it was him on the line. My life is complete. Vic told me after that weekend, and he said, you know, I always knew when Mother's Day come, there was always a piece of you missing.
Raymond's sense of completeness was mirrored by her parents, who, now in their 60s, opened their heart to their eldest grandson. But then they'd never stopped opening their hearts, especially Germaine, who welcomed her sons and daughters-in-law as if they were her own children. But time was passing, and Cebel's retirement loomed imminent. Germaine, for the first time in her life, was able to spend time working on her flower gardens, and the beautiful displays of color in their yard were her pride and joy. But for Cebal, who had worked so hard during his life, the prospect of time off was a bit of a worry.
Mom, we knew, would handle it, because Mom, and she had friends, you know, her and my Tante Muriel, for example, were really close. Ramon, when she was there, he spent a lot of time. Dad really had no one. And Dad was not, you know, even I'm sure at the bar, he'd chat away, but he was not he was not a good conversationalist. And so we were really anxious about him, and that's why it was such a blessing when he got into this whole carving and creating this hobby.
The hobby started with a gift, a model horse and wagon set given to their dad by one of the children, a gift that rekindled the spark of Cebel's first love, working with his dad in the blacksmith shop and the horses of his youth.
We would roll our eyes a little bit and say, oh my God, he'd take the top of a margarine container. When he turned the body and the head of a little man that was driving his wagon, the hat was this round piece of plastic from a plastic container, a margarine container. He cut it to just the right size so it fit over the piece of wood that was the top, that would become the top of the hat, the brimmed hat that the little man was wearing. And then he would paint it black so that the top of this piece of wood and this plastic was all black, so the man was wearing a black hat. He picked up, remember the old 5-star whiskey bottles? My God, he had everybody picking that little plastic 5-star off of off of those whiskey bottles, and Dad stuck those to the side of the wagons just to decorate his wagons. Caps of all manner of, a cap from something would become a bucket. He'd put a little wire handle on it, and that'd be hanging off the side of the wagon as a milk bucket or something. He just, I don't know, we just thought he was goofy. But an art form? Man, oh man, it was others who told us that this was art.
And others did recognize it. The Alberni Valley Museum has a section dedicated to the folk art of Cebal-Ruel, and collectors of Canadiana have ranked it among the very best of French-Canadian folk art produced in the country. But for Cebal, it was always about reopening that window into his past.
It got his hands busy. It got him reliving those days that he missed, those days that he loved, those days of working with teams of horses. So it got him back into all that. And man, did it occupy, it occupied the next 20 years of his life. Because he did this till he was in his mid or early 80s.
That was Dad's expression of where he was from, of what it expressed to others, just what that life was all about for him, the meaningfulness of it. And it was done with his hands, and it was done with crudely. There's nothing absolutely fancy and immaculate, or I don't know what terms to use. It's very crude stuff, but it's very real.
He had a little desk there and had a little, very small anvil and a big old chunk of steel. That's where he would, pound out his bits and pieces of wire and steel hose or steel pipe or whatever it was. When he set up, he'd set up to maybe do 20 horses at a time. He'd do 10 truck wagons at a time. So he'd set up his jigs, he'd cut all his materials, and then he would sit and put it together.
Cebal's wagons and models became the focus of both their lives, with Germaine sewing all the wagon covers and dressing the small wooden figures that Cebal crafted. Together, they made a covered wagon for every child and all 54 grandchildren, as well as countless other wagons, cabooses, drays, and blacksmith shops, many of which sit on museum shelves or in private collections. But all along that wheel kept turning as it must, and on December 27, 1998, Germaine, who had spent her life giving to others, closed her eyes for the last time, dying quietly in hospital from complications following heart surgery.
I was with her. The last thing she did was pray the rosary.
But you know how hard Mom is working up there? We haven't left her alone since she's gone, so she's working as hard as she used to down here. No, she's still with us. We cry to her and everything else all the time.
Still is.
I heard, a deep despair, and I also heard some anger and some feeling of unfairness, because Dad was older than Mom by 6 years, and it certainly had I don't believe he ever believed that he would be the one to survive.
He was lost. He was, he tried to stay on his own. He tried to make his own meals and stuff. He just, but he did try. He thought, but he had never cooked in his life, and so yeah, it was drastic change for him. Still, he was strong enough that he managed to carry on, but life was not the same, and you could tell that he was.
No, life wasn't the same, and Cebel's fading eyesight and hearing made it increasingly difficult for him to communicate with his children. But then another blow, when in 2009, Edgar, the oldest boy in the family, died suddenly.
Yeah, Edgar and I were pretty well always close. I was his shadow, I guess. But we did work together more than any of the others did. Yeah, and that summer we were planning that trip to Alaska that he had organized and everything, and looking forward so much to that. And yeah, that was a real shocker. But we did carry on, and that's what he'd wanted.
So it was a different time. He adjusted, and I think maybe that's part of what they've taught us so well. Not that they sat us down and lectured us, but what they taught us by experience and by doing was, as life changes, you adjust. You make the changes you make in order to move on to that next era. You know, I mean, could you imagine sitting down thinking about moving 11 children from Debden, Saskatchewan to Port Alberni, British Columbia? If you sat down and thought about it for very long, you'd scare the heck out of yourself, and you'd bail on that project. You'd get the heck out of it. But they got here. They were convinced that there was a better life to be had here, and that Dad could be at home more and be more supportive of Mom and all the kids. And so they just did it. They didn't sit down and think about it and plan it out, and they just did it. We weren't very good planners. We weren't taught to plan, but by God, we were taught to adjust.
We didn't realize it, but until we went on our own and had our own families and that made us realize how much they had sacrificed. Life was good for us. It was tough for them, but I guess they loved us enough. It was worth it.
It doesn't matter what we do, think, or say, or what trouble we get into. There's this group of people who are never going to close the door. There's always going to be a safe haven.
Cebal-Ruel died peacefully on October 11, 2010, at the age of 96, with family by his side. And at the time of his passing, that family, the family he and Germaine had started so many years ago in Debden, numbered in the hundreds. There are currently 54 grandchildren, 89 great-grandchildren, and 10 great-great-grandchildren. Each of them a part of the legacy of these two remarkable people. Each of them turning the wheel.
There's a silver lining behind every cloud. And just poor people, that's all we were, trying to make a living out of blackland dirt. We'd get together in a family circle, singing loud.
Daddy sang bass,
Mama sang tenor. Me and little brother would join the ride in there. Now singing seems to help a troubled soul. Now one of these days, and it won't circle won't be broken by and by, Lord, by and by.
Daddy sing bass,
Mama sing tenor. Me and little brother will join a ride in there in the sky, Lord, in the sky. I remember after work, Mama would call in all of us, and you could hear us singing for a country mile. But now little brother is done gone on, but I'll rejoin him in a song. We'll be together again up yonder in a little while.
Daddy sang bass,
Mama sang tenor. Me and little brother would join a ride in there. Now singing seems to help a troubled soul. Now